Hey, welcome back, guys. Reviewing the Odyssey today. Finally got to go see it. Before we get into anything, like I want to do with most of my reviews, if not all of them, they're going to have spoilers. If you don't care about spoilers or you've already seen the film, then okay, nothing to worry about. Let's talk about the story first thing. I have heard from a lot of people that the books are so long that it can't be encapsulated in one 3-hour film, which again, it's a 3-hour film, so of course he was going to cut a lot of things out. He couldn't keep all those things in there. Shortcutting certain things, like say, for example, the Lotus Eaters then just being reduced to a single lotus flower that Odysseus is on the island with Calypso eating with her, things like that. The Cyclops story being much shorter, condensed to a somewhat horror sequence of them trapped with the Cyclops in the cave. On the original story, I do believe that there was a trick performed against the Cyclops in order to escape them. It would have been a longer scene if they had implemented those things, but Nolan, of course, was trying to cram all of this into a 3-hour experience. I don't have a problem with it. As someone who personally, like I said in my last video, has not read the entire thing, I was fine with the film. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good story. I thought it was fine for how long it was. The film is not in chronological order, so you'll see Matt Damon as Odysseus as an old man in certain shots, and then back to being young and show him the Trojan War, and you'll get all this back and forth showing their voyage, showing him back home. And in my opinion, it doesn't hurt the film. It's not a problem for me. I think Christopher Nolan could have done a very good job if he wanted to do this in chronological order, but instead having it kind of be chopped up all over the place. I think he handled it really well. Some people thought from the original book that Homer wrote was somewhat a progressive character, even for a story written that long ago, where there are elements where it seems like Odysseus is very faithful to his wife Penelope, even when he's away from her on his journey. There are some people who say, I've been seeing arguments online that they say, well, no, he wasn't really loyal to his wife, he cheated on her. But from what I researched, from what I looked up, again, as somebody who hasn't read these things, correct me if I'm wrong, but those specific tales of Odysseus willingly doing those things are written by different people after Homer, and if you consider Homer to be the only canon for Odysseus, I mean, that's up to you guys. It seems like Nolan wanted to go heavily with Homer's tale. From Homer, you kind of get, based on interpretation, you get an Odysseus that was faithful to Penelope, and the only time he, say, slept with other people, he was forced to. It was against his will, in a sense. But in the movie, Christopher Nolan kind of handles it in the sense that Odysseus is losing his memory. He can't remember his wife. He can't remember his kid. He's forgotten about them. So it seems like he wanted to maintain that element of Odysseus from the original book. I like that. Another thing he did in a kind of progressive sense, you could say, he had Odysseus look sorrowful in the film, kind of sad and feeling guilty for their actions, and slowly throughout the course of the film, the burden of what him and his men did to the people of Troy and other people along the way, it weighs on him, it weighs on his conscience, and that just seems to be kind of a progressive thing that you do see elements of in the original Homer's tale, based on your interpretation of that part in the book, where apparently Homer compares Odysseus weeping over the actions that they performed in Troy to, say, a slave girl being dragged off by conquering soldiers. It seems like Nolan went in the direction of that interpretation, that Odysseus did in fact feel sorrowful for what his men did, and he wasn't entirely proud of what they did in Troy, and again, the faithfulness, and he made him somewhat of a good man in this savage time, you could say, during the Bronze Age, in these times of war. You have Nolan putting an emphasis heavily on the film throughout with Zeus's law, the golden rule, treating each other as you would treat yourself. You have the witch, Circe, condemning Odysseus and his men for raping and pillaging on their journey, and turning his men into pigs for, what the actions they performed. It's not the most complex message of morality or anything in this film, but it's very good, it's timeless, it's simple, but it's effective, and it works really well for this film. Overall, like the story, I like the way Nolan handled it, and it was really good. As much as I've looked up differences between the original and this, I don't have too many issues with how he handled the general story, the moral teachings, and the overall structure of the story. Talking about the music was incredible. The music was really good. It's not the best score of any of his films, but it was really good. It wasn't horrible. It wasn't bad. It's a Christopher Nolan movie. The music's always great. It was really cool to learn that they had used a lot of actual Greek instruments, apparently. Nolan wanted to get rid of the traditional orchestra and use Greek instruments. My favorite part of the movie, hands down when it came to the music was definitely the Battle of Troy. There were so many parts where they were showing us flashbacks to the Battle of Troy. I'm talking about that one portion of the movie where they really showed the entire battle, the majority of it. That just really put you in the moment. It really made that scene intense, and that was the coolest part of the movie for me in terms of music, was the Battle of Troy. Cinematography, visuals, it's a really beautiful, amazing shots. I said that in the last video. I mean, again, Christopher Nolan film, you're going to expect those kind of things in his movies, especially with the whole thing being shot in IMAX, and you're just going to get a grand scope of the ocean, the land, the hills, the mountains, the forest that they're in, and it was just amazing visually. Troy and Ithaca were very good. I like the way they built these cities, these castles, these individual kingdoms. It was all very good. I didn't have any problem with the aesthetics of so much the structures here, the buildings themselves, and the lands that they showcase, the different islands they visited. A lot of people did have an issue with the clothing looking a little too modern, specifically the scene with John Berthal and Tom Holland when they're shooting arrows together, and it looks like they're wearing bulletproof vests, is what a lot of people compared it to, and I have to say, it does look a little bit like that, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a little off-putting at times. Some outfits in this movie throughout do look a little too modern. So while not being historically accurate, it's not a huge problem. Didn't bother me too much, but at the same time, they also just don't look very good. And if you're gonna change, in my opinion, if you're gonna change something from being historically accurate, you better make it look badass, you better make it look cool, you better like do something special with it. Which brings me to Agamemnon, which ironically, that is the one costume in the movie you're seeing right here on the screen. I have no problem with this. Yeah, not historically accurate, obviously. Nolan was flexing a little bit with, don't forget, I directed Batman, one of, if not the greatest live action Batmans, in history. So he has that aesthetic in this film, and it's really awesome. It's really badass. And every time it is shown, it just comes off as very intimidating. It comes off as very powerful. When they finally open up the gates to let the army in, and you just see him standing there in his armor, and he just stands there as the army starts to pour in through the gates. The reason that one kind of works for this film and doesn't bother a lot of people is because you made it badass. Every time he was in the room, every time he was on the field, you just made it very intimidating, very badass. And so because of that, it gets a pass in a sense, versus everyone else just visually was kind of boring, kind of plain. It wasn't that special. None of the outfits were amazing whatsoever. So if anything, you just run the risk and danger of throwing people a little out of the experience when they see outfits that just look a little too modern. The monster designs, I liked all the monster designs. The Cyclops was amazing. Loved that they used a life-size, what was it, a 30-foot puppet or something like that, or 50-foot? I don't know, it was 50-foot, but it was just a gigantic puppet, and obviously filling in the gaps with CGI, but the majority of it was an actual giant puppet. That Cyclops looked amazing. That was pretty cool. And the sirens, the Hydra, I want to say, I'm not familiar if that monster's called something else. The giants on the island, which from what I've heard, those aren't in the original book. They were cool nonetheless in their armor. That was a pretty cool scene. One scene I was pretty excited for, and it wasn't the most disappointing thing in the world, but I was hoping that the sirens would look like that famous art piece or how they're described apparently in the original book, what I believe is half bird, half woman, that they could actually fly and perch on the ship as they tried to seduce the men and sing to them, but none of that happened. Nolan simply kept them on the rocks, and they didn't have bird-like features, so that was a little disappointing. I wanted that to happen, but then again, I could see Nolan avoiding that kind of thing because he did want to step away from the supernatural elements of the film and focus more on the human element and their experience going through all of those things. So he didn't even show any of the gods except for Athena, technically, but we will come back to that subject later at the end of the video, talking about Nolan separating from the supernatural from the original story. I don't know if I said this already, but see it in IMAX. I highly recommend it. The Cyclops scene was incredibly loud. People in the theater were covering their ears because the Cyclops roaring in pain was just incredibly loud, and just how dark it was in that scene with a giant screen like that. You almost felt like you were in the cave. Same thing later on in the film when the boat is sinking and there's thunder and lightning and the flashing is so intense. You felt like you were sinking on the boat with them. Kind of staying on this topic, a little bit of visuals that's going to bleed over into the next topic, which is talking about the cast. We talked about this last time a little bit in the controversies surrounding the movie, because there was a lot of controversy surrounding a lot of minorities being cast in this film. There were a lot of people checking out of the film saying, I'm not going to see it, it's garbage, I'm not going to give him my money for doing this, he's gone woke. Not going to go over all that subject matter too deeply because I already went over that in my previous video. You can watch that for yourself. Spoiler, I don't think Christopher Nolan did anything technically woke. I don't think he had a political agenda with a lot of the minority castings, and I certainly wasn't thinking that the film was going to be so horrible or unwatchable that I wasn't going to buy a ticket and see it for myself. I did mention that I had to see it for myself and confirm for myself if it would be off-putting seeing so many minorities in a setting during an era during the Bronze Age, even in a fictional story, but still is taking place in a certain era in the Bronze Age in Greek culture, where you typically in royalty, military specifically, and overall in the population would see more often than not white individuals. How it would affect the film to see so many minorities in the royalty positions, military positions, and just the civilians in general. Was it off-putting, and does it take you out of the experience? Myself personally, yes, it did to a certain degree. It just can't be helped. Just knowing what it should look like, just knowing what the majority of the people should look like, it is a little off-putting. It does hurt it for me to a certain degree. It doesn't ruin the entire 3-hour freaking movie, but it does affect the film to some degree. And it wasn't just like Nolan put in that controversy, mind you, a controversy that he himself has said was experimental. He was trying to make it fresh for modern audiences, and he even said he was probably biting himself on the ass on this one. Those are his own words, saying that he was risking something by trying something new here. And like I said in the last video, I don't agree with him. I don't think you need to see your skin color on screen in a movie to feel a deeper connection to the film, especially if it's taking away historical accuracy for the sake of not making it better or fixing a plot hole, but just trying to give you, the audience member, a deeper connection. If anything, you're going to do the opposite, and you're going to take them out of the experience, and you're going to remind the people, and it's kind of a little slap in the face from time to time, making you remember, oh yeah, this is Hollywood, this is fake, I'm watching a movie, I'm sitting in a theater, because a lot of these people would not be here in these positions. That's my main concern. That's the only thing, is just that it can give that effect to some people, and it gave it to me sometimes. It wasn't just that Christopher Nolan put that controversy in the film. I would say, in a sense, he rubbed salt on the wound. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but what I mean by that is, for example, the scene after the Battle of Troy, I believe, was over, they stopped at some village by the shore, and they were raping and pillaging, and so they were talking to some villager while he was on his knees, and then they told him who they were. And then of Odysseus's crew, the two specific soldiers that Nolan chose to put in front of the camera to tell this villager who they were, they chose the blackest black guy in the crew and the darkest Indian in the crew, and he got on his knee, he looked at the villager in the eye, and he said, "We're Greeks." You had to pick those two actors to say that. I couldn't help but chuckle a little in the theater. It was just very off-putting. So Nolan didn't just put minorities in the film, they kind of were sprinkled throughout the entire film and took up the majority of it. So it can have a negative output for some people. Regardless of how I try to structure this, regardless of how I try to explain this, the racist and bigot comments are gonna come, I don't care. But what I found interesting was something that a lot of people said in defense of those things when people were worried about the film coming out was, oh, you guys are worried about Elliot Page and Lupita and Zendaya and other minority castings in the crew and everything. Well, they're not even in the film that long. Elliot Page isn't in the film that long. Lupita's not even in there, but only for a few minutes. This is something that people kept saying as a defense for the minority castings, to which my response is, well, that's funny that your defense is it's not in there very long. To me, that makes it sound like you somewhat agree that it is off-putting, that it doesn't feel right. So your only defense, at least the main one that I've seen, is, well, they're not in there very long. And to that, I also have a second point, which is, that's actually not true. So that's what I was hoping for going to the film. It's actually not true. So you have Helen of Troy, played by Lupita, you have Elliot Page, Sinon, I hope I'm saying that correctly, and then you have Zendaya as Athena, and then you have a good portion of Odysseus's crew which is with us for the majority of the film. So it's multiple characters, and even the first three that I listed, they don't just appear once, said and done for a minute or two. They appear in the film sprinkled throughout the entire 3-hour film. It's not one and done at the beginning or at the end, it's throughout the entire film. And even when you hear them by name, if you hear Helen of Troy's name in the film, obviously you can't help but mentally think back to what actor is playing that character. So who cares if you don't see them visually more than 2 or 3 times? If you hear their name throughout the film, you're going to think about that actor, and that again can throw you out of the experience. If it doesn't for you, great. I don't have a problem with that. Glad you can enjoy it to a certain level higher than I can. I'm happy for you, but I couldn't. It was a little off-putting. I didn't like that. If anything, I thought Charlize Theron, who played Calypso on the beach with Matt Damon, I thought she would have done a better job as Helen of Troy. She definitely would have passed a lot better for the most beautiful woman in the world. People were saying Elliot Page is not in the film that long. Same thing that I said with Lupita. Same exact thing. Elliot Page is still sprinkled throughout the film. That character is still referenced multiple times. You see them in the underworld. You see them in the beginning of the film. You see this character over and over again, sprinkled throughout the film in little moments. And also, whenever you hear their name, again, what's going to happen? Mentally, you're going to think of Elliot Page. You're going to think to yourself, oh yeah, that scrawny, lesbian-ass looking actor is who they cast to play, quote unquote, one of the greatest warriors in the film. It's off-putting. It was a terrible choice for that character. That was a terrible cast. And here's the thing. We're going to get into the acting portion of this, but when it came to Elliot's acting, I remember saying to myself, maybe Christopher was just like, look, Elliot's acting is just incredible. That will sell it, and who cares if Elliot's not physically qualified as much as other actors could be for this role, but the acting is going to be phenomenal. The acting wasn't that great for as small of a portion as there were in the film. So many other actors could have acted just as well, if not better, and taken up that role and shown themselves to look like a much greater warrior. Matt Damon and Benny Safdie, the guy who plays Agamemnon, sorry. The problem I had with both of them in the film was just physical build. Not a huge issue, but same thing, kind of similar with the problem with Elliot Page is I wanted Matt Damon to be, or not Matt Damon to be, but I wanted a bigger actor to be in that role. Someone that looked a little tougher, with a different stature. I mean, Matt Damon is a small actor. Matt Damon, we talked about this in my last video, just his face, his voice, his tone, how he carries himself, how big he is as a person. It's just a little off-putting. When we get into the acting portion, I'm going to talk about how I love his acting. I really do. But the thing is, seeing him fight all those suitors in that room at the end, seeing a lot of these actors who are a lot bigger than him, and he's a small guy and he's able to beat them all. I know he's a great warrior, but I mean, if you also just have maybe a Hugh Jackman type actor or someone like Hugh Jackman or that build, and Hugh Jackman's not a terrible actor also. I mean, I've thought about him in this film. Maybe Matt Damon was a better choice in terms of acting, but again, that build could have been found in a better actor maybe, or the equivalent of Matt Damon in terms of acting. But Agamemnon's actor was a bit scrawny once they took the armor off. That one, not a huge issue because he was covered in the armor the majority of the time. So, and you never see his face, and they purposely hid his face from you the majority of the time, so it kept that intimidation factor. Not the biggest thing in the world, but it was kind of similar to Matt Damon. Matt Damon and Elliot just not really selling that in terms of great, strong warriors, in terms of build for this film. Okay, let's just get into the acting. Overall, the acting performances were amazing. They were great. Some were good. It was mostly great performances, and I would say the rest are good. I wouldn't say anybody was downright bad. The only person you could argue was a bad actor in this is Travis Scott, but Travis Scott is not an actor, and Travis Scott really does have the smallest cameo in this film, the smallest on-screen time of any major celebrity in this film, so it doesn't really count. Again, just a little sprinkle of some off-putting stuff that can throw you out of the experience. That's a problem, but at the same time, when we're talking about the acting, doesn't ruin the whole thing overall. Elliot Page and Jon Bernthal were my least favorite performances in this film. I was excited about Jon Bernthal being in this film. I was curious to see what he would do with his character, and I didn't like it. Here's the thing though, I'm not saying it was bad acting. It was good acting, but it didn't belong in this movie. in my opinion. I could see why a lot of people were saying he really did just give us his thug acting that he gives off in a lot of his tough characters in a lot of movies and TV shows, and that felt very off-putting. It didn't belong. And even when he's talking to Tom Holland, he does that typical thing with his head. He like turns his head as he talks, and he's like talking to Tom Holland, and he's doing this, and you know, it's just trying to look tough and intimidating as he's talking to him. And I just don't think that was the right vibe for his position in the film. Matt Damon gave him some great compliments in the interviews, and honestly, I think Matt Damon was just being nice. Matt Damon knows he's the bigger actor here, and also Matt Damon is a much better actor than John, in my opinion, and so I think he was just being nice in the interview. In Matt Damon's own words, I believe he said something along the lines of, Jon Bernthal set the tone for the film. What tone? He was acting like a modern day thug. You know what I mean? He was acting like a modern day tough guy, and his dialogue was that of a very modern guy. It didn't really fit the vibe of the film and how everyone else was talking. Despite them talking with American accents, by the way, as I judge the rest of these acting performances, if you're curious why I'm not going to say anything about the American accent thing, I'll just get that over with real quick. Maybe it could have been better if they talked similar to how they talked in Troy with Brad Pitt. It wasn't a huge issue. It didn't bother me too much. That is the one change I'm kind of okay with Nolan doing for the sake of modern audiences, for a connection. That one wasn't too bad. The thing is, they're all doing the American accent thing. So since they're all doing it, we're judging the acting performances based on that starting point. And from that starting point, John just doesn't do too great in this film. And Elliot Page does not do that much better at all. Elliot, I would say, is the worst performance in this film when it comes to the big celebrities who had more screen time than, say, Travis Scott. Robert Pattinson was a very good villain. Speaking of actors who were in films where their build didn't necessarily match the character, speaking about him being the last Batman, for example, but he did very well in here. If anything, his performance here just told me that he could play a really good Batman villain, in my opinion. I could easily see him pulling off a Scarecrow, the Riddler, ironically, because the Riddler was the villain in his last Batman movie, his only Batman movie, but I could see him pulling off that role very well based on his character in this film. He did a really good job playing a sleazy suitor. That's exactly what he said he was trying to do, and oh man, he sold it really well. He played a hateable character very well. The crew with Odysseus was very good. The actors were very good, as much as I'm poking fun at them. The Indian guy, the black guys, the Asian guy, like, it's just for being off-putting visually because they don't seem to belong in that era. Still, they were great actors. Their performances were great. I mean, it's fine. Last but not least, my favorite performances, hands down, top three: Anne Hathaway, Tom Holland, Matt Damon. Ironically, I was worried about Tom Holland. I was excited about Jon Bernthal, and it was flipped for me. After seeing the movie, I was disappointed in Jon's performance. I didn't think he belonged in the film. I think another actor could have done better. Tom Holland, I was thinking to myself, Spider-Man, kind of had Spider-Man on the brain and was just like, I don't know how he's going to do well in a Christopher Nolan film. Even Tom Holland himself said he wasn't sure how well he was going to do in a Christopher Nolan film, and he was nervous about it, and he did an amazing job. He really did. I loved his role as Odysseus' son. It was amazing. He did a really good job. I liked Tom Holland in this film a lot. I now honestly would not mind seeing him in a future Christopher Nolan project. He just worked really well in this film. Loved his performance. Matt Damon, said it in the last video, I was worried about Matt Damon for a similar reason to the Spider-Man thing with Tom Holland, past experience, Jason Bourne. Whenever Matt Damon has tried to lead in an action film, it's never been good. And the best example of that is Jason Bourne, and I think that's because Jason Bourne was more of a robotic, tough guy, almost like a John Wick type character. I think Matt Damon showed us that he's not cut out for that, at least for me personally. So from that past experience, I was telling myself, I don't want to see him take charge in an action film, but was pleasantly surprised that obviously it was a lot different. He was a badass warrior who was highly skilled, who was a good general, a good leader, but at the same time, very human. He was terrified of the monsters. He showed real fear, really showed in his eyes, really showed in his face, the expression, looking at the Cyclops, looking at the giants, screaming to his crew to get back to the boat, his screams of fear, his screams for his men, shouting at them, run, retreat. He really sold those moments of fear. It really made him feel more human than anything. So overall, I liked it. I said in my last video I was worried about following Matt Damon the entire time, but I liked it a lot all the same, and his acting was really, really good in this film. Anne Hathaway, I saved the best for last. Anne Hathaway was my favorite performance in this film. Anne Hathaway, I think, was the best performance here. She's one of the greatest actors in this film, if not the greatest actor in this film, in my opinion. She's up there with Matt Damon, and they are just incredible together, but her one-on-one scenes with Tom Holland were just incredible. Apparently, she even learned how to loom weave, I believe it's called. I had to look it up, what she was doing throughout the film, unraveling that fabric. Like, she did some method acting for this film. She really sold the role, and she was just amazing. I would say of all the characters, in her performance, she really sold her anger, her sadness, just her emotions, just anger and her depression over her husband being gone. She really sold the look and feel of a woman, or just an individual in general, who missed their loved one for years and was waiting for them to come back, and in a tense situation where you have tons of people in your house who are just there waiting to take advantage of you and take your house from you, take your kingdom. And she really showed off the stress and the anger and sadness of someone dealing with that situation. Anne Hathaway, although not being in the majority of this film, I think she stole the show. I think she did an amazing job and was just one of the greatest performances in this movie. One more negative. I know we're kind of ending on a negative here, but it is something I wanted to say about the film. Going into the film, I already knew that Nolan said something along the lines of, the gods were not going to be shown. Athena is shown, but the majority of the gods, Zeus, Poseidon, the main ones, they're not going to be shown. He wanted to focus more on the human elements of the film, the human emotion, their struggle. And when I heard that, I thought, okay, he wants to show them struggling under the weight of knowing that there are gods reigning over them and, you know, all these monsters, and show them trying to apply this, living under Zeus's law and treating one another as you would treat each other, humans sticking together under the weight of monsters and magic and gods, and living under that boot and learning to unite with each other and not fight against each other and kind of be unified as they struggle to live under the reign of maybe tyrannical gods, if Nolan was going to keep them in that sense. But Nolan made it clear that he was going to avoid the supernatural to a large degree as compared to the original Odyssey. So I went into the film with all of that in mind, and mind you, I was okay with that. I wasn't too wary of that. I was actually looking forward to that. I thought that was really cool. But then I saw the film, and I have to tell you, I think he went a little too far, and I don't like it. I'm not saying I want to undo all of it, and I want Zeus to have an actor, and I want Poseidon to have an actor. I want all of the gods to have actors and show up and have as much dialogue as they did in the original book. I'm not saying that. I like the direction Nolan went. I would keep it that way, but again, I think he went a little too far, in my opinion, after seeing the film. And Nolan, I've looked, Nolan has not said anything directly, but after watching the film, it feels like Nolan was giving hints almost at atheism, like there's no gods at all, like they actually don't exist. And you might be saying to yourself, but wait a minute, we saw Athena. She was there the entire time. She was with Matt Damon. There's even demigods. There's witches. There's a Cyclops. There's a Hydra. There's the Whirlpool, which is, you know, there's the sirens. There's the giants. You know, there's all these things. What are you talking about? You know, we're in a world full of mythological things and magic. Why would Nolan want to be like, well, there's magical monsters, but there's not gods? That doesn't make any sense. I agree with you, but why does it feel like the gods don't exist? Because ever since the beginning of the film, Nolan had established that certain characters would hear lightning and thunder and then say to themselves, oh, Zeus is angry, or Zeus is interested in this competition, like towards the end of the film. Nolan even said in some interviews that something that was discovered more and more through history as science advanced, we learned that a lot of supernatural events, quote unquote, could be explained away using science. It was just nature. You know, sailors on rough seas would blame Poseidon. They would see thunder and lightning, or lightning would strike them down, or a house, and they would say, oh, that was Zeus. And have me thinking that throughout the film. And again, you might be asking, wait a minute, there's monsters, there's magic. What do you have to say to that? What I say to that is Nolan showed Odysseus on the beach with Callisto eating the lotus flower and losing his memories and slowly regaining them regaining tales of his wife, his kid, his kingdom, his crew. If anything, you might be able to interpret his film as he never saw any of those things. Another question might arise, okay, well, why would he think of something so fantastical as a Cyclops and sirens and all these things? Well, these things were already in their culture, apparently. These things are already myths and legends that they knew about and they've spread stories of. The film has done this more than once. For example, Tom Holland goes to King Menelaus, John Bernthal's character, and when he asks him about his father Odysseus, he looks at the crowd sarcastically and says, does anyone want to spin a tale about Odysseus, tell a legend? You know, there's so many people have said so many things about him. Basically, the film already planted some seeds along the lines of there's legends, there's just rumors, there's things that people say, fantastical things that may or may not be true. The film kind of established that. And also remembering that Odysseus is the only one of his crew that makes it back. Agamemnon makes it back safely. Apparently he doesn't encounter any monsters. He just makes it home safely, and his crew, and doesn't seem like they were attacked by any monsters or anything. Odysseus is the only one to make it alive from his crew. Looks almost as if Nolan might try to imply that he was drugged, which he was to a certain degree, but how effective that drug was maybe messed with his memories. And for a man living in that day and age who believed in monsters and magic and was told that the gods exist and that they were real, maybe as he's remembering their voyage, comes up with all these fantasies in his mind about how they died, and maybe that's not how they died. Maybe they died just from wild animals on the islands. Maybe they just died from drowning in the ocean. And the way he remembers it is visiting dead soldiers in hell and seeing the Cyclops and seeing all of these things. I think Nolan left the door wide open. He left many, many clues to piece together an interpretation here that in his film there were never any gods and there were never any monsters. It was all in his head, which I don't like. Obviously, if he comes out and says it's not the case, it's not the case, but I don't think he's going to say that. He's going to leave it up to interpretation, and I don't like that being left up to interpretation for this film. I think it's better if you have these people living, like I explained earlier in the beginning of this video, if you have them living with the idea that they are under the weight of monsters and gods and learning to unite under that, give us that fictional aspect of it, but still have the non-fictional, timeless, moral story of we need to unite, we need to be friends, we need to have peace, we need to honor our gifts and our deals. When we give people presents, maybe not sneak a bunch of soldiers in there and conquer each other and lie to each other and break Zeus's law. I think there would have been a little more weight with that if there actually were gods that were over them. And here's the thing, how would I have handled that versus what Nolan did is, again, I like what Nolan did. I don't want to show actors for the gods. I don't want to give them a face and dialogue necessarily in his film the way he handled it, but what I would have done at the very least, let me know what you think of this in the comments, but maybe something as simple as showing a cloaked figure. I mean, they showed Athena. Technically, they showed a god, and they showed the face of a god and gave one of them dialogue. Technically, even if Athena was just using the image of a young girl that Odysseus saw decapitated in Troy, and that was basically Athena's way of punishing Odysseus by showing him that image throughout the entire film. Similar to that, but even way less than that. No faces shown, no dialogue, show cloaked figures. Similar to how Matt Damon was wearing a disguise, wearing a cloak at the end of the movie with the suitors, and he looked really cool wearing that, where you couldn't see his face. It was his face was concealed in darkness because of how far the cloak was on his head. Have cloaked figures look like that standing outside of the castle. Remember when the lightning struck as they were setting up the axes, and one of the men said, Zeus is very interested in the outcome. Let's say they look outside, because the ocean was right there, right? The waters are right there by the castle, right off the cliff. Let's say the waters are crashing against the shore really hard, and the waves are crashing loudly, and there's thunder and lightning, and then you have the men say, oh, Poseidon and Zeus are really interested in the outcome of this decision. And then right after that, you show a cloaked figure standing on a hill nearby, looking at the castle. Can't see a face at all. And in the background, you see lightning, you know, as in to indicate this is Zeus. And maybe you see an individual standing on a rock far out in the water. Same thing, shadowy, can't see the face, but it's implied that that's Poseidon. No dialogue, no face. And that's all we get of them, and it's gone, you know. But again, if you do that, you can't argue that that's an hallucination from Odysseus's character, because this is after he's already back home and he's ready to do the challenge with the suitors. So if Nolan really was going in the direction of there's no supernatural here, he won't do that. But if he isn't, I would have done that, and I would not have left the door wide open for interpretation that the gods do not exist and the supernatural is not here. I don't think that was a good choice to leave that door wide open for that interpretation, but that's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think. It is a solid 8 out of 10. It's not a 9. It's not a 10. It's not a perfect movie. You heard all the negatives we went over in this film. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of debate with the negatives I still have on the minority castings and Elliot Page. Even that last part that we talked about with the supernatural thing, that's a negative for me to a degree. It's not the biggest thing. It's not the biggest negative in the film, but that is a negative for me. And I wish Nolan still went in that direction, just not as far. Overall, the acting is great. Anne Hathaway, Matt Damon, Tom Holland are amazing. It's not even just an okay movie. I would say it is a great movie, and I highly recommend you guys watch it. Too many people were fear-mongering about this, saying don't even watch it, don't give him any money, don't give him any ticket sales. It's going to be horrible, and saw it for myself. It's incredible, and I highly recommend you see it in IMAX. That is definitely going to be the best way to experience it. So yeah, 8 out of 10 for the Odyssey. Thank you guys for watching. See you in the next video.